that we read earlier. One is that in the early Genesis, all creation is created. Then you have the creation of man, creatures, sun, etc. in chapter 2. And then after that, you have chapter 3, which is primarily discussing the adversary and this deception. And normally when I teach on the better sheet, I'll lay this with you now. We won't go deeply into it. I won't have time to discuss it because I'm not teaching or reteaching what was already presented. But generally, the way that I teach the better sheet, that there were trees in the garden, and these trees were not literal trees. Nobody ate fruit, nobody ate an apple. The word apple is not even mentioned in the book of Genesis. The very first time you see the word apple, it pops up in Deuteronomy, and it is used as an allegory or metaphor. He tells Israel, you are the apple of my eye. Metaphor, allegory, right? This tree that was in the garden, one of the trees that was present in the garden, which ties directly into what we're going to present tonight, is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And again, I will not go all into the depth of it tonight, but I want to lodge this thought as a framework inside your brain. The tree of knowledge of good and evil was just that, knowledge of good and evil. And generally, when I teach about the trees in the garden, I compare it to any other tree. Now, everybody on this line probably comes from a different family. And when you go to a family reunion every year, if you do not have it on your shirt, you normally have a family tree. And that tree, which is not a literal tree, has all of the information because cousin Joe over here married auntie such and such over here, and that's how my nephew over here is related, and he lives in Chicago. But then he relocated to North Carolina and he met Betsy Lou, and she's married to such and such, and that is all in your family tree. And every year people go to this reunion. In the branches of the military, notice the language that we use. The branches of the military. The Air Force is a branch of the military, but you know what distinguishes that from the Navy? Total different branch. They navigate the waters to learn how to fight. The Air Force as a branch navigates the air. The Army navigates the land. All of these are called branches. And my question is, what tree do they come off of? Let me continue. Mathematics are broken into branches. In mathematics, algebra is not geometry. Arithmetic is not calculus. You can study arithmetic and never study calculus because arithmetic is a branch of mathematics. Why do we use the language called branch? What is on that branch? Knowledge. That's it, knowledge. The same knowledge that some of us came across to learn how to cohabitate with the opposite sex is just knowledge. That's literally all it is. It's just information. And that information can be used in two ways. It can be constructed for good. I can take my knowledge of sex, or you can take your knowledge of sex, or somebody with an evil mind can take their knowledge of sex and run a prostitution ring from east to west coast, from north to south in 5 different countries, and manipulate people starting at the tender age of 8, 9, 10, or 12, the first time you kind of, have these emotions in your body, and teach that knowledge to generate income. And that would be evil. That same knowledge, that same information can be presented in a way where you can be married,
Bluetooth device.
family, and in that family procreate and have children and grandchildren and have a loving, committed relationship that lasts 20, 30, 40, 50 years until death do you part. It's just knowledge. And that knowledge can be used in 2 different ways. So when I teach on the better sheet, I'm teaching that tree of knowledge of good and evil is just information. And all information can be used in 2 different ways. I can take my knowledge of science. Astronomy is a branch of science. Biology is a branch of science. Physics is a branch of science. I can take my knowledge of chemistry and distribute methamphetamines from the east to west coast and build an empire. You read about people and hear about people like the Mexican cartels and the Pablo Escobars and the drug traffickers in Americas and DC and Chicago and LA and the who lived in the Cabrini Greens of the projects. They took knowledge of chemistry, formulas and sciences and mixing things up and made themselves millions of dollars and ended up in debt or in jail. Why? Because they used the information for an evil purpose. You can use that same knowledge of biology, that same knowledge of chemistry, that same knowledge of physics to make cupcakes with low sugar in them that can heal diabetes. It's just knowledge. So we're going to take that context and we're going to go into other texts of the text to say that this information was accessible. And they were said, listen, you don't have, just like a child, anybody who has children, you do know that there's a point in a child's mind, whether they're socialized or not. If you had a child, there's a point where they walk around with no clothes on, totally innocent, totally don't mind being just, kind of, and they say birthday suit, meaning you're totally nude as an infant. And you walking around and you have no control over your functions and your body fluids are going all over the place. And at some point in time, that a child will tell you, don't come in the bathroom. I don't have any clothes on. At what point does this knowledge come to their mind? At what point does it kick in that I'm not dressed. I don't want my parent who brought me into the earth to see me like this anymore? When does that knowledge begin? And why does it seem like it just happens in an instant? Well, that's the knowledge. It's just information. Now, again, people may teach it different ways. I'm just explaining when I teach the Torah. Now, take this, and we're going to start going into a couple other points of recap, and then we're going to go into the text. Take this thought. You take that same information, that same knowledge, and Moshe said, today I set before you life and good, death and evil. Choose ye this day. Eliyahu said when he was battling the idols on the Mount of Baal, he said, if Yah be the Elohim, then choose him. But if he be Baal or Baal, then choose him. The knowledge of good and evil. See, the interesting thing about the Bereshit is that it never said the tree of knowledge and good or evil went anywhere. I'm saying some of us are still eating off that tree to this day. But we think when we read the Torah, it's something mystical. Like it got to be some magic way that this happened. No, it's the same way it's happening to you. That knowledge and information was presented to you. A couple other things, and Kabod, if you don't mind assisting, we're going to look at this other theme in the text. One of the key ideals is that early text, Yah only appears after man thinks to do evil or he actually does evil. Think about in the Bereshit when, Adam and his wife ate of the forbidden fruit. Then the Almighty appears. And then when Cain thought to do some evil to his brother, the Almighty appears. What's on your mind, Cain? And then he slays his brother and says to his brother, where is your brother? Now, this is after the evil. But you'll notice that after this happens, man begins to be progressively worse. They don't hide their evil anymore. Another thought that I want you to think on is mankind grew to no longer accept visits after sin. Mankind fully expanded their sin. I'm going to sin in the face of the Almighty. And what he going to do about it? That's what we're going to pick up in Genesis 6 and 7. Because the Almighty got to the point where I can't tolerate y'all anymore. One other thought I want to share with you, and this is where we'll pick up in Acts chapter 5. And this is just a brief recap before we go into it. And I want you to think about this in the context of this tree of knowledge of good and evil. And this is, again, a recap as we go into, this will lay the foundation for what I'm laying out in Genesis chapter 5, or Genesis chapter 6 and 7. And if we don't read all of these texts, I want you to write these down and examine your own self after you got the knowledge of good and how evil began to be present in your life. Now, you'll notice this. From the Bereshit with Adam, then you'll notice Cain after he murders his brother. You notice this happens with David, and you notice this happens with everybody else just about who commits iniquity. The first thing man does after he commits iniquity, carnal man, what does he do? And anybody can answer that. What does carnal man do after he commits iniquity?
Hides.
He
Tries.
hides, covers his tracks. Keep this in mind as we read through, right? So we'll start in Acts chapter 5, and I'm just doing a brief recap, and then we're going to go into 6. Acts chapter 5, and if we don't mind, we'll start at verses 1 through 5. Acts chapter 5, and we'll start at 1 through 5. Now, I'm laying down the premise that when mankind sins, the first thing that they decide to do, the carnal mind, which is enmity against Yah, they decide to hide or camouflage their sin. And why would they do that? Acts chapter 5 and verse 1. And Maury, Tim, are you still able to read? Or Kaboyo?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Okay, Acts chapter 5, verse 1 through 5.
Okay. Acts 5, verses 1. It reads, "But a certain man named Hananiah with Shapira, his wife, sold a possession, and he kept back from the price, his wife also being aware of it, and brought a certain part and laid it at the feet of the emissaries. But Kepha said, Hananiah, why has Hasatan filled your heart to lie to the set apart Ruach and keep back from the price of the land for yourself? While it remained, did it not remain your own? And after it was sold, was it not in your authority? Why have you conceived this deed in your heart? You have not lied to men, but to Elohim."
So notice again, as we begin to go into Genesis chapter 6, where we're getting to, there's this testimony in Acts where, if you haven't read it already, the foundation of the government of Yah began to grow. Whatever you understand about the Mashiach, all his work that he did, at the end of his work, he had about 70 people following him, and that 70 grew into 120. All of the miracles, all the cleansing of lepers, all of the walking on water, all of that work left you with a very few small number of people. It was 120. And from that, the government began to grow, where people began to sell their possessions, have all things in common, and help grow the manifestation of this government of Yah. And people began to sell these properties, join them together to eliminate poverty amongst themselves. And one person and his wife said, well, we're gonna say we sold it for 40,000, but we really sold it for 80,000. And what did they begin to do? They tried to do that privately. Their intent was not to fully disclose the information. Notice the pattern of carnal man, to hide their sin. So this is going to be instrumental as we go into Genesis chapter 6. Let's go to Numbers chapter 5. And again, we won't go through each one of these just for time's sake, but Numbers chapter 5. We didn't read 8 and 9, but his wife, in cahoots with him, did the same thing. Let's conceal the matter. Let's not actually say that we did this sin. Let's lie. Let's bear false witness. And let's conceal the matter. Numbers chapter 5, and we'll pick it up at verse 5 through 7.
It reads, "And Yahuwah spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel. When a man or a woman commits any sin that men commit in trespass against Yahuwah, and that being is guilty, when they shall confess their sin which they have done, and he shall restore his guilt in its principal, plus 1/5 of it, and give it to whom he has been guilty."
So here it's letting us know, and can you read, did you read 7? Sorry.
Yes, sir. That was 7.
So here it's letting us know that what you're supposed to do is confess your sin. Again, recap, instrumental as we go into the next chapter. And if at some other time, I'll do a full expository on the tree of knowledge of good and evil, but this walks us into the next kind of framework. Proverbs chapter 28 and 13. Proverbs chapter 28 and verse 13.
Reads, he who hides his transgressions does not prosper, but he who confesses and forsakes them finds compassion.
So I want you, I don't know how familiar everybody is with every Bible narrative, but think about when David committed that sinful act with Bathsheba. Do you remember how much he labored to get Uriah to go back home to his wife? And when he wouldn't, like, man, go home and out of all things, we in the middle of a war. You telling one of my main soldiers to go home and lay up with your wife and have a child? Why? Because he was trying to hide the fact that he did this evil deed. Think about Achan, if you read the book of Joshua, where he covered the Babylonian garment. When the Creator told him, don't touch any of that stuff, he hid it in his possessions. And when it was discovered with some evil going on, tribe by tribe, house by house, they got down to him and said, well, who told you to go touch that stuff? Because that's what carnal man decides to do. So I want to use that as a brief recap before we go into the next chapter of 6. One last thought, and then we're going to start in Genesis chapter 6, is that in Genesis chapter 5, again, the earth was growing progressively worse. In Genesis chapter 5, you have this book. If you've never read the book or never paid attention to the book, there is a book, and the book is called the Book of the Generations of Adam. So, Maury, if you don't mind, we're just going to read Genesis chapter 5 and 1. And what book are we reading right now in Genesis chapter 5 and 1? We are reading the book of the generations of Adam. And I want to point this out because, again, ties into where we're going next. Genesis 5, and we'll just read verse 1.
Reads, this is the book of the genealogy of Adam. In the day that Elohim created man, he made him in the likeness of Elohim.
All right, and there's a lot to say about that. I don't necessarily have time to go into it, but the schools of thought I come from, we don't necessarily teach that Yah was 6'5", 280 pounds with a buttocks, right? So whatever image and likeness wasn't necessarily just like, he looked like, 5 fingers on each hand. Like that wasn't necessarily the point. I won't limit it to what it is or what it's not, but I won't express that only. So now we're taking this information, mankind hiding their sin. We're taking this information, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which was, to me, as far as I'm convinced, it's just information. And that information can, like all information, can be used in 2 different ways. You can use it to manipulate people. You can use it to rob people. You can use it to make people sick. You can use it for health benefits. Like some people on the phone may be vegan. Some people may be plant-based. Some people may not eat sugar. Some people may not eat high fructose corn syrup because that stuff can be deadly to the digestive system and the kidney. And somebody knows that information, and those who know it are making profit off of it. And they're destroying you while it's generating revenue for them. So now we're going to go into Genesis chapter 6. So we explored some of these key ideals, did a small recap to lay some of the foundation, and now we're going to go into Genesis chapter 6. So Morey, if you don't mind, we can start at Genesis chapter 6, and we will start at verse 1. And if you can put a link in the chat for where you're reading from, I can post it also. But Genesis 6, Bereshit, and verse 1, we'll be reading there. Oh, you know what? If I go out of this presentation, it might not light back up, but we'll see. You'll see. Genesis 6 and verse 1, and we will start there. Yes, sir.
And it came to be, men began to increase on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of Elohim saw the daughters of men, they were good. And they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And Yahuwah said, my Ruach shall not strive with man forever in his going astray. He is flesh, and his days shall be 120 years. but definitely more on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of Elohim came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, the men of name. And who saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And Yahuwah was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. And Yahuwah said, I am going to wipe off man whom I have created from the face of the ground, both man and beast, creeping creature and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of Yahuwah. This is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with Elohim. And Noah brought forth 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the earth was corrupt before Elohim, and the earth was filled with violence. And Elohim looked upon the earth and saw that it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And Elohim said to Noah,
Pardon me, Moray. I can hardly hear you. Please forgive me for interrupting.
I apologize. Let me know. Is that better?
Yeah, that's a
Much
lot
better,
better.
Moray. Hallelujah.
All praises. Appreciate it. Verse 13, it says, And Elohim said to Noah, The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And see, I am going to destroy them from the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and outside with the cover. And this is how you are to make it. The length of the ark is 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. Make a window for the ark and complete it to a cubit from above. And set the door of the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. And see, I myself am bringing flood waters on the earth to destroy all flesh in which is breath of life from under the heavens. All that is on the earth, it is to die. And I shall establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you and your sons, and your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of all the living of all flesh, 2 of each you are to bring into the ark, to keep them alive with you, a male and a female. Of the birds after their kind, and of the cattle after their kind, and of all creeping creatures of the ground after their kind, 2 of each are to come to you, to keep them alive. As for you, take of all food that is eaten and gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them. And Noah did according to all that Elohim commanded him. So he did.
Hallelujah. All right. So we're going to start to examine some of the things that are happening here. I won't give you the cliffhanger, so it's important that I make note of this during this discussion. And it says, and it came to pass when men began to increase on the face of the earth, that daughters were born to them, right? And then he made this statement in verse 3. And Yah said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever in his going astray. Meaning, I'm not going to continue to wrestle with man to do the right thing anymore. He is flesh, his days shall be 120 years. Now, I'll say different ways to interpret this. One way to interpret this, his days shall be 120 years, is that man will not live past 120 years old from this day forward. And then you can read in the Psalms that his numbers shall be 70 days, like 70 days. And that's the average that man lives. And that is one side of the argument, or one side of the understanding in the way that men frame their understanding of what this text is saying. Here is another. My spirit shall not always contend with man in his wickedness. And from the time that I commissioned Noah to do this work, man will have 120 years to live. Now, if you don't work in the built environment, like you don't work construction, and you've never built anything, a bookshelf, you might have put together like an IKEA bed or a bed from some furniture store, and you may have struggled to put it together because you weren't acclimated to it. There are a few things to note. When we read the book of the generation of Adam, or the book of the genealogy of Adam, which we looked at in chapter 5, if you did the mathematics on it, Noah wasn't necessarily alone in the earth at this point in time, because individuals like Methuselah, if the math is correct, Methuselah died about 5 years before the flood happened. So other men were around in Noah's day. But it appears that the Creator gave Noah a period of time to build this ark, to be able to salvage humanity and his effort. And that period of time was 120 years. If you have not been to, for example, Kentucky, they have a replica of Noah's Ark. I had the opportunity to visit, take my niece there, I believe, maybe my niece and my daughter, and probably about 4 years ago. And this ark is about the size of 2 or 3 football fields long. And I have never had as much respect for Noah until I went to visit this ark. Otherwise, it just appears as a story. But when you look at this large edifice that he constructed, the skill that it went into floating a device for 5 months on water and animals in it and being able to navigate it, that took a considerable amount of skill to build, let alone a considerable amount of time to build. So when we read verse 3, one of the things that we can construe, if you view it this way, is that that period of time would be 120 years. That much time was going to be necessary for the building of the ark, for the preaching of repentance, and for the calling the assembly of the animals and individuals to be saved. When you start to look in chapter 7, you can see that very few people were saved because most people rejected the message. Well, how does that tie into what we read a little earlier about the Mashiach? Well, one of the things and one of the ways that it tied in, after all of his great work and all of his great miracles, there's about 70 to 120 people following him. Do we notice that that's an interesting parallel, that there were 120 people in the upper room? There were 120 years that man had time to live. It's just an interesting parallel. And if my numbers are off, I'll go back and check the book of Acts. But in the upper room during the Shabbath or the Pentecost, 120 people, 120 followers. Then it goes on to say in chapter 4, and the giants or the Nephilim was on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of Elohim came into the daughters of men, they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, the men of name or the men of renown. And y'all saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth. And notice this, because this is what we're going to be extracting out of this text, that every inclination of their thoughts of his heart were only evil continually. And when you think about what this evil is, as we read down, he begins to clearly articulate what this evil was. And for a lot of reasons, and I'll just name 2, we are not going into the Nephilim and where they derive from. But I will tell you this. There are 2 schools of thought on this. There are one school of thought that angels cohabitated with humans and that they created these hybrid offsprings that were giants. There is another school of thought that these were the children of Cain. They were men of wickedness. They had children and they continued in their wickedness. It is incumbent upon you as a student of the Bible to search for your understanding in what the text is expressing. That responsibility is on you. As myself and other Morays have conversations about these texts, there are two schools of thought. Just for clarity, I do not teach that angels cohabitated with humans. That is a school of thought. So to take you off the hook, we are not looking deeply into that. There are two schools of thought. Both have some level of research and people going into it, but we won't address that today. And the reason why we won't address that is twofold, and I'll address one of the two, is because it's important that we understand what Genesis is expressing and beyond the ideal that angels lay with women and produce, humans, etc., that were giants. Beyond that thought, the primary thought we know is that evil continually grew, and that is what we want to explore. So again, another forum, another opportunity, another time, we'll be able to dive into the other teachings and share thoughts on that. But notice in verse 5, and Yah saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And Yah was sorry that he made man on the face of the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. And he commenced to wipe off man from the face of the earth, but he was going to deliver Noah. Notice here in verse 11, this is important to note. And the earth was corrupt before Elohim, and the earth was filled with what? What is this word here? What is this word? The earth was filled with what? This word here.
Violence.
Violence. It's important to understand what is being expressed in this text, right? So in Bereshit, the word for violence is a word that you may be familiar with because you may see it on the news. And then when you see it on the news, it is a particular group that you may associate it with, whether you do it in fairness or not. But that word is Hamas. The word for violence in Hebrew, and you can look it up in different texts, but it is Hamas. Let's look at this earth being filled with violence and what the text is expressing to us. So whether you're on the side of the fence that they were angels cohabitating, whether you're on the side of the fence that these were men cohabitating with women and they were the line of Cain and they were incessantly and consistently evil, really, at the end of the day, the point is that the earth was filled with violence. Now, take note of this here. We're looking at the Hebrew word Hamas, okay? And it says violence, wrong, cruelty, injustice. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. Now notice the Strong's definition goes further. H2554, violence by implication. Wrong. Notice also it says here, this is what we're trying to get at. Metonymy, right? So if you don't understand the word metonymy, we can look it up for you, right? But there are metonyms in the Bible. There are synecdoches, there are allegories, there are idioms. There's all these different languages that the Bible uses to express their thought. So wrong, and it says violence by implication, wrong. By metonymy, unjust gain. Notice, the earth was filled with unjust gain. We're going to explore this deeper in Bereshit chapter 6. The earth was filled with unjust gain. damage, cruelty, false, injustice, oppressor, unrighteousness, violence against, violence done, violent dealing, wrong. I want to focus on unjust gain. This becomes really important because what the text is laying out, when you read chapter 5 and you read chapter 4, you notice that Cain killed his brother. And why did Cain kill his brother? We're going to look into this book, which is a history book that any kind of reputable scholar who starts to read or study the Bible will quote from this book, which is a history book. And when I use this book, I primarily use it for Hebraic history, whether oral history or written history, to articulate what was happening historically as the growth of treachery happened, this violence. Now, this is the truth. When we just read Acts chapter 5 with Ananias and Sapphira, we don't use this language in our day. But what they did to Peter and to the ecclesia or the church or the government or the body in lying and concealing the fact that they sold the property for 80,000 and told the church, the assembly, the body, the emissaries and the apostles that they sold it for 40,000. What they did was execute violence on the body of believers. They sought to injure the body of believers through violence. Why? Because everybody else was selling their house. How are you going to keep back part of the price for yourself? That was violence. This is what the word violence means. Hamas, unjust gain. Keep this in mind. Hamas, unjust gain. And that unjust gain, that false balance in society creates oppression, that creates injustice, that creates damage. It creates unrighteousness. This is how the earth began to be filled with violence in that day. And this is part of what the text is expressing to us in the growth of this violence. So here, notice this. The earth in verse 11 was corrupt before Elohim, and the earth was filled with unjust gain. Now, I'm not making this up. We just read this violence in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 11. Is violence, wrong, cruelty, injustice, and it's particularly a metonym for unjust gain. This is what the earth was filled with in those days. We're going to read through Josephus, which is a history book, and notice here what began to happen. It says Adam and Eve had two sons. The elder of them was Cain. Notice this, which name, when it is interpreted, signifies a possession. The younger brother, Abel or Abel, which signifies sorrow. So one son name is possession, another son's name signifies sorrow. One son names signify possessions, and if you don't know anybody who is possessed with possessions, notice the line of thought that history records with Cain. And his younger brother Abel signifies sorrow. It says they also had daughters. Now the two brethren were pleased with different courses of life. For Abel, the younger, was a lover of righteousness. He didn't care about unjust gain. He was a lover of righteousness. And believing that Yah was present at all his actions, he excelled in virtue. And his employment was that of a shepherd. But Cain was not only very wicked in other respects, but notice this. I want us to focus on this. But Cain was wholly intent on getting. This is what the Torah is teaching us. I want to keep you in mind that we're reading the Torah. So when you hear this urban vernacular today and these people in the streets talking about, oh, you got to grind. You got to hustle. You got to get it. Cain was like that. See, Ananias and Sapphira was like that. Jezebel was like that. They were only concerned with getting. They were concerned with possessions. So notice I'll start again. For Abel the younger was a lover of righteousness, and believing that Yah was present at all his actions, he excelled in virtue, and his employment was that of a shepherd. But Cain was not only very wicked in other respects, but he was wholly intent upon getting, and he first contrived to plow the ground. He slew his brother on this occasion, on the occasion following. They had resolved to sacrifice unto Yah. Now Cain brought the fruits of the earth and of his husbandry, but Abel brought milk and the first fruits of his flock. But Yah was more delighted in the latter oblation, when he was honored with that which grew naturally of its own accord, than he was with that which was invention of a covetous man. Notice, covetous, violence, only intent on getting. The invention of a covetous man and gotten by forcing the ground. Whence it was that Cain was very wroth with Abel, that Abel was preferred by Yah before him, and he slew his brother and hid his dead body, thinking to escape discovery. But Yah, knowing that what he had done, came to Cain and asked him, what was become of thy brother? Notice he's asking, what happened to your brother? Because when the carnal man decides to sin, the first thing the carnal man wants to do is hide his sin. He said, what has become of thy brother? Because I have not seen him in many days, whereas he used to observe them conversing together at other times. But Cain was in doubt himself and knew not what to answer to give to Yah. At first he said that he himself was at loss about his brother's disappearing. But when he was provoked by Yah, he pressed him vehemently, as resolving to know what the matter was. He replied, he was not his brother's guardian or keeper, nor was he an observer of what he did. Notice the mindset of Cain. And I'm telling you that in Genesis chapter 6, this mindset began to be pervasive through the earth. Now, the Torah teaches us that you shall love your neighbor as who? Anybody?
Yourself.
Father.
So,
As yourself.
That means you should keep up with what's happening with your neighbor. If your brother be waxing poor by you, you shall surely bring him into your house. If your enemy's donkey or ox falls in a ditch, you shall surely retrieve it for him and help him to get it out. That's the love of your brother. But Cain was not a guardian of his brother. He didn't care about his brother because Cain was what, as the history says? He was solely intent on getting. Cain was about his money. Cain did not care about niceties, just like Ananias and Sapphira didn't care about niceties. Just like Jezebel, when her husband wanted some land and pouted that the man wouldn't give it to him, well, she said, I'll go lie and keep the man killed. You're the king. You could have anything you want. Because Jezebel, that spirit of Jezebel, is wholly intent on getting. And when you wholly intent on getting, you have no concern for your neighbor. This is why the industries that we are subject to will plant high fructose corn syrup in our food. This is why that they would shoot us up with vaccines that are to our detriment. This is why when the Ethiopian Falasha Jews came into the land of Palestine during the airlift of 1984, when they were bringing all Jews back home, the Falashas, the dark-skinned ones, were brought over and they were told that they were being vaccinated for health concerns to make sure. But you know what they were doing to those women? They were ensuring that they were infertile so the multitudes wouldn't grow. Because that nation is only concerned about getting. That's the mentality of Cain. This is the mentality that grew in the earth in those days. And as that mentality grew in the earth in those days, the earth was filled with violence. And what are we saying violence is, according to the word, the Hebrew word, Hamas, is unjust gain. Notice how this continues the narrative continues to go. So he was not a guardian of his brother, nor was he an observer of what he did. But in return, Yah convicted Cain as having been the murderer of his brother and said, I wonder at thee, and the sacrifice and offering the sacrifice, thereby making supplication to him to be extreme in his wrath to him. But he had made him a curse and threatened his posterity in the seventh generation. He also cast him together with his wife out of that land. And then it says that they were afraid. Now notice this also, right? Because we're going to get to a few other texts. Notice this here. And when Cain had traveled over many countries, he, with his wife, he built a what? A city named Nod. A city he built. He built a city. Now, cities are used for commercial purposes. Now, if any of you on the phone live in a country, you know the closest thing that is a commercial is a Walmart that's probably 20 minutes from where you live. But most of you probably live in a city, and that's where a job is at in the city. That's where industry is. That's where factory is. And this ideal of Cain built a city, he built a city for commercial purposes. Notice this. This city, which was a place, it was Nod, which was a place so called. And there he settled his abode, where also he had children. However, he did not accept of his punishment in order to amendment, but to do what? To increase his wickedness. For he only aimed to procure everything that was for his own bodily pleasure, though it obliged him to be injurious to his neighbor. Notice again. The earth was filled with Hamas, violence, unjust gain. The earth was filled with violence, cruelty, unjust gain. See, as long as you're trying to get what you can, and many of you may grew up in urban environments and lived in housing tenements or housing places that were not befitting for humans to live. But the people who owned the housing tenements, they knew you couldn't complain enough, so they didn't mind if it was mold in the house. They didn't mind if it was roaches or mice. They didn't mind if it was cold and drafty air. They didn't mind if your heat bill doubled and tripled. You know why? Make sure that rent is paid on time, because they wanted to fill their pockets with unjust gain. That unjust gain is oppression. That impression is injustice. Oppression is injustice. That oppression gives the false balance, is damaging, and it is unjust gain. That is the violence that the earth was filled with. So notice that Cain was interested in procuring for himself everything for his own bodily pleasure, though it obliged him to be injurious to his neighbor, because he's already told us that he's not his brother's keeper. He augmented his household substance with much wealth. By rapine and violence, he excited his acquaintance to procure pleasure by spoils by robbery. Pleasure and spoils by robbery. He excited his acquaintances to procure pleasure by spoils and by robbery, and became what? A great leader of men into wicked courses. So part of the giants that we're reading was he was a great leader of men. Nimrod was the same thing. He was a mighty hunter before Yah. And when you look up that word hunter before the face of Yah, he was in opposition to the Almighty. He wasn't doing Yah a favor. He wasn't hunting men, I'm going to make you fishers of men. He was building men in opposition to the Creator. So he became a great leader into men of wicked courses. And notice this, he also introduced, notice this, somebody's mic is hot. So if your mic is open, please be kind.
I got it.
Thank you. Notice this. Notice Cain's mentality. Notice how he introduced men to augment their substance through violence. So Cain was almost like the neighborhood guy whose mother was on some type of substance. Then he decided to start selling the substance. Then he became the big kingpin. because he ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, going back to that point. And he used information for evil purpose and exaggerated his evil. Notice this here. He also introduced a change in the way of simplicity wherein men lived before, and was the author of measures and weights. Why do you need measures and weights? Anybody? Why do you need measures and weights?
Or just scales.
For scales. So think about this. At one point, you can go into the garden, you can go into any field. You wanted an apple, you wanted a pear, you wanted a banana, you wanted a peach, you wanted any fruit that was in the trees of any of the gardens. Because I don't just believe the tree of knowledge of good and evil there. I believe that there were literal trees there, like walnut trees and cashew trees. And I believe that there were sciences and knowledges in the garden. And all of it was accessible. So if you wanted to eat off the pear tree in the garden for free, you could do so. If you wanted to eat of the fruit of any of the land, you could do so. But when Cain got a hold of the trees, these trees are mine. You cannot come over here unless you come through me. And if you touch one of my trees, I'm going to kill you. And if you want some of the apples, or you want some of the pears, or you want some of the peaches, I can weigh them out for you and you can pay me. Well, Cain, I don't have no money. Well, go get me some sheep and I'll take those sheep in exchange. Or matter of fact, give me your wife. I'll take her in exchange. Because Cain was filled with violence. Notice he also changed in the way of simplicity where men lived before. And he was the author of measures and weights. As whereas they lived innocently and generously while they knew nothing of such arts, he changed the world into cunning craftiness. He changed the world. He changed the world into cunning craftiness. This is what we're discussing today. Now, with that being said, and those things being read, we're going to go into the last part of Genesis chapter 6. And if the screen acts right, this is our Torah. Notice, these are our instructions. And when you think about the ways, as I mentioned when we started, how the earth was filled with violence, and we have been taught this, and now we're coming into the Torah, we're being asked to practice something different. We're being asked, can you love your neighbor as yourself, please? Can you not exact of your neighbor violence? Can you share your resources with your neighbor? Because Cain wouldn't do that. That's not the spirit of Cain. So let's take a look at the few texts that we're going to go over. Now, again, history is telling us, the Torah is telling us, the definition of violence is telling us that the earth was filled with this violence. And this violence specifically was this corruption through unjust gain. Now, what do the prophets have to say about this? Maury, we're going to start in Micah chapter 2. And again, this is a glimpse. This text I can teach for 6 months straight, and you're going to learn something new every week when I teach it, right? This is a glimpse into a larger set of thoughts, and that larger set of thoughts is that unjust gain and that violence that the earth was filled with began to be more pervasive through the earth. And the Creator said, look, I got to destroy this. As soon as he destroyed it, not too long after, that same mentality surfaced up again. And the children of the nations began to populate the world, grew into a multitude, and reorganized to do more wickedness. And today, the earth is filled with violence. If I took you into the Congo, where great diamond mines exist, and the people of Europe and the people of Canaan, who only had the mind of getting, would decapitate and dismember people's arms because they want these diamonds to be shipped over to Europe. That's the mentality of Cain. That's the mentality of Jezebel. That's the mentality of this whore city called Babylon. It's about unjust gain. And it's not concerned about your neighbor. If you look in Haiti, right now in Haiti, and you can look at any government on the face of the earth, right now in Haiti, in Port-au-Prince particularly, because I don't conflate Haiti with Port-au-Prince, but right now, you know what's happening in Haiti? Violence is happening. And you know why violence is happening? Because the poor are standing up and saying, look, we don't want the rich robbing us anymore. We don't think it's fair that the resources are used unjustly. You know what got Martin Luther King bullet put in his head? You know what got Thomas Sankara a bullet in his head? You know what Ho Chi Minh stood up and said against in Asia, in Vietnam, when the war was going on in America, when America decided to go fight on behalf of the French, and you know why they were fighting? Because Vietnam was producing rubber, and at the same time in the 70s, the automobile industry was at its peak, and they said, we need rubber for tires. Let's go get it from Vietnam. The earth was filled with violence. It was filled with unjust gain. Now, what right do you have to come into somebody else's land and take their resources, their diamonds, their coconuts, their trees, their sugar? You don't have any right. Israel didn't even practice that as a nation. Let's go into Micah chapter 2. We'll go through these verses. We'll take a pause because it is getting late, at least on the East Coast. Micah chapter 2 and verse 1. Micah chapter 2 and verse 1.
It reads, woe to those plotting wickedness and working out evil upon their beds. In the light of the morning they practice it, because it is in the might of their hand. And they coveted fields and
They covet what?
They coveted fields.
So I want your land. And you know what? I want it because I need to build an empire. I want everybody on here house. And I'm going to figure out a way to get it because I need to build an empire. They covet fields. They covet lands. The earth was filled with violence and unjust gain. So notice here saying they devised this wickedness. Now they're not devising fornication on their bed in this text. They're not devising lying per se, like, oh, I'm gonna just tell people about Santa Claus. They're devising ways to get extra resources in their pocket. They covet fields. What else do they do?
And seized them, also houses, and took them away. And they oppressed a man and his house, a man and his inheritance. Therefore, thus says Yahuwah, see, against this clan I am planning evil, from which you do not remove your necks, nor walk proudly, for this is a time of evil. In that day, one shall lift up a proverb against you, and he shall lament with a bitter lamentation, and shall say, we have been utterly ravaged. He changes the inheritance of my people, how he removes it from me. He apportions our fields to the backslider.
So notice here, the earth was filled with this iniquity. It talks about the covet fields, and they take people's field by violence, and their houses, and they take them away and they oppress them. And they taking people's heritage away. Lands that people lived on for thousands of years, somebody's gonna come take from them. This is what Jezebel did to Ahab. I mean, Ahab did to the man that wouldn't sell his field. He said, I can't sell you my field. My grandfather gave this to me. Well, I'm just gonna violently take it from you. Because I want it. Isaiah chapter 5. The earth was filled with violence in those days. And this is what Noah was supposed to come and save the people from. He was supposed to be a comfort from this continued violence. Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 1 when you get it.
Isaiah 5 verse 1 reads, please let me sing to the one I love a song for my loved one regarding his vineyard. My loved one has a vineyard on a fertile hill, and he dug it up and cleared it of stones, and planted it with the choicest vine, and built a watchtower in its midst, and also made a winepress in it. And he waited for the yielding of grapes, but it yielded rotten ones. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem, and man of Yehuda, please judge between me and my vineyard. What more could have been done to my vineyard that I have not done in it?
So you're
Why?
just comparing his people to this vineyard. He did all these things for his vineyard and they did not turn out the right way. Notice as you keep going.
Why, when I waited for the yielding of grapes, did it yield rotten ones? And now, please let me inform you what I am doing to my vineyard. To take away its hedge, and it shall be burned. To break down its walls, and it shall be trampled down. And I lay it waste. It is not pruned or dug, and thorn bushes and weeds shall come up, and I command the clouds not to rain on it.
Now, why is he doing all of this to his people? Now, a lot of times people think like, oh, Israel just worship idols. Like you think that they were just some like neophyte savages that bow down to some rocks or some statues. Like that's a narrative, but they weren't worshiping some other wood and stone god. Like it wasn't, that's not what the Bible is talking about. Now I know that that's a common practice, but that's not what the Bible is talking about. Behind every deity that they worship was a god of commerce. It was lining somebody's pocket. Every deity that was being worshiped was going into somebody else's pocket. And the more that they promoted that worship, the more they generated revenue. It's no different today. When you celebrated Christmas just a year ago, or 2 years ago, or 4 years ago, that enterprise, that teaching, that idolatry lined somebody's pocket. When you celebrated Valentine's Day, the reason the commercials promoted that so much, that you walking around with a heart and the sweetest day, and oh, I'm gonna give my boo some flowers, because that lines somebody's pocket. All of the teachings of the worship line somebody's pocket. So Israel started to practice this non-egalitarian environment of sharing their land and sharing with their neighbor and giving. Cain corrupted that. And the children of Cain continued going in that way. And that grew. Now, this is what he's complaining against the nation of Israel against. Notice in verse 7 what he says.
For the vineyard of Yahuwah of hosts is the house of Yisrael,
Mm-hmm.
and the man of Yehuda is his pleasant plant. He looked for right ruling, but see oppression, for righteousness, but see weeping.
So he was looking for justice, like the sharing of resources. But what he got was oppression. He got Hamas, unjust gain. And the unjust gain made people cry out. They robbed the poor. This is what Yeshua accused the Pharisees of doing. You devour widow houses. This is what he's talking about. This is the way the Israel mentality was in that day. Notice verse 8 and 9.
Woe to those who join house to house, who add field to field, until there is no room, and you are made to dwell alone in the midst of the land.
Yeah, buy the block, bruh. Buy the block, man. We got to own the block. Yeah, woe to them who own house to house. So you're going to get 6 houses next to each other. And what you're going to do? Charge all these people some absorbent price to line your pocket so you can go live in some luxury resort? This is what the text is talking against. Woe to them that do that. Line house to house till they be alone in the earth. In verse 9, if you would.
And by hearing, Yahuwah of hosts said, truly many houses shall be a waste, big and fine ones, without inhabitant.
So he said, listen, I'm going to destroy y'all because this violence should not be pervasive. Ezekiel 22 and verse 12. We'll read the last two and then we will take a pause there. Ezekiel chapter 22. This is the Torah reading. The more we come to understand the Torah, the more we come to understand Yah's ways, the more we practice what the way he really wants us to behave amongst each other, we could actually have true liberation. And that true liberation, there's no need for charity. I don't have to give my money to nobody on this line. Like, no, you come live in this big old land that we got and we just share the resources. Why we need to, like, why I'm gonna pay for you to pay the man who oppressing you? We don't need to do that. This is what the Torah is expressing to us. That violence was filled, and he's asking the people to reform from that violence. Ezekiel chapter 22, verse 12.
It reads, in you they have taken a bride to shed blood. You have taken interest and increase. You have cut off your neighbor by extortion, and you have forgotten me, declares the Master Yahuwah.
So I'm telling you that the people didn't literally forget Yah. They didn't forget him. They actually was using his name and executing this type of violence. See, in the Torah, if I let you borrow $100, I can't charge you 120 when you pay me back. That's not right. If I run a business and you work for me, you got to get paid the same day. It's not right for me to hold your money. This is a whole new custom and practice, and this world doesn't teach us that. So here it's letting us know here that by usury and increase or unjust gain, thou hast greedily gained of thy neighbors by what? Extortion. This is what Cain was doing. He was extorting the people. No, no, no. You can't walk over here and touch these peaches. These are my peaches. We can measure some out for you. And maybe the measuring them would be accurate. Tomorrow the measurement may change. Well, I got 20 peaches for a shekel yesterday. Well, today they're 7 shekels. Same peaches. They my peaches. I can do whatever I want with them. Isaiah chapter 59. Isaiah 59 and 1.
Reads, look, the hand of Yahuwah has not become too short to save, nor his ear too heavy to hear. But your crookedness have separated you from your Elohim, and your sins have hidden his face from you, from hearing. For your hands have been defiled with blood, and your fingers with crookedness. Your lips have spoken falsehood, your tongue mutters unrighteousness. No one calls for righteousness, and no one pleads for truth. They trust in emptiness and speak worthlessness. They conceive trouble and bring forth wickedness. They have hatched adder's eggs, and they weave the spider's web. Whoever eats their eggs dies, and when one is broken, an adder is hatched. Their webs do not become garments, nor do they cover themselves with their works. Their works are works of wickedness, and a deed of violence is in their hand. Their feet run to evil, and they hurry to shed innocent blood. Their thoughts are thoughts of wickedness, wasting and ruin are in their highways. The way of peace they have not known, and there is no right ruling in their ways. They have made crooked paths for themselves. Whoever treads in them shall not know peace. Therefore, right ruling has been far from us, and righteousness does not reach us. We look for light, but there is darkness. For brightness, but we walk in thick darkness.
Now notice here, and I'm not going to read Matthew 5. I'll pause and stick a pen where we are in Genesis 6 here. With this Isaiah 59. Notice this in verse 2. But your iniquities have separated you and your Elohim, and your sins have hid his face. Now, let me exaggerate my point. I'm probably going to tell you that the Almighty does not actually have a face. Like, I don't actually think he has a foot either, because he said, heaven is his throne and earth is his footstool. So when I think about that, I'm asking, how big is his foot? And if he actually set his foot on the earth, would it be still hanging there? Like, I don't, I'm just kind of exaggerating my point here, so bear with me. When he said he hid his face, that he will not hear you in verse 2, do you think whatever this entity is that we call Yahuwah Elohim, do you think he ever can't actually hear you? Like, how big is his ears? Does he ever actually stop hearing anything? Does he go to sleep? See, I don't think he sleeps. I don't think he's actually a he. I think that's just the way we express it. But he hid his face when iniquity increases, meaning you'll live in darkness, because his face, if it shines on you, is full of light. When his face shines on you, you're doing something right. Notice Moshe, who began to execute righteousness, began to teach the Torah. He went to go interact with the Creator. He came back, his face was shining. They had to put a veil on him. But he hides his face when you do wickedness. He hides his face when you do injustice. He kicked Cain out of the land, and his face was separated from Cain because Cain was doing the wrong thing. When we think about the Bereshit, and we think about Genesis chapter 6, it is of utmost importance that we understand the context of the way that the text is laying this ideal out. The earth was filled with Hamas. It was filled with unjust gain. This unjust gain corrupted the earth. It continued to grow, and he said, I got to wipe these people out. I asked them not to charge interest to each other. They charge an interest. Cain is over here building a city. I didn't tell you to go build no city. I sent you out for a punishment, and you decided to double down on your wickedness. The book of Josephus said that he was wholly intent on getting. And when he got kicked out, he didn't amend his ways. He tripled down on them. And he changed the simplicity of the way that men lived. And that grew in the earth. And the Creator said, nah, I got to get rid of these people. I will pause there. I appreciate y'all giving me ear today. I appreciate those who opened the opportunity for me to teach. I will see if anybody has any thoughts, questions, or concerns. Even if you're mad or angry, you can express that. That's that type of guy. I'm able to listen to it all. I have alligator skin, so you can't offend me that much, So, any thoughts, questions, or concern? Genesis chapter 6. Any thoughts, questions, or concerns? Let me see. Oh boy, I might skip Moreh Kafa first. Hold on. All right, Moreh Kafa. Go ahead, good sir.
Shalom, Mr. Kai, and shalom, double honest to you, Zakane. I will let some others go before me. I just want to raise my hand just to stand in line, but I'll let others cut in front of me.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Okoti Royalty. Yes, ma'am.
Hello. Yeah, my question was regarding an earlier point you made about 120 people being on the ark with Noah. That was earlier, in the teaching. Is that something you could elaborate on at all?
Oh, just for clarity, I said that they had 120 years to live. So there's two ways that text is taught in my findings. One is that mankind, from the time Genesis chapter 6 talked about it, man's years shall be 120 years. One way that is taught, that no man will live past 120 years as of this day. That's one of the ways that is taught. Another way that is taught is man has 120 years since that pronouncement went out of Yah's mouth till the flood came and destroyed man. I subscribe to the latter thought, that from the time he made that declaration, he gave man 120 years to repent, for Noah to build this ark, to gather the animals and whoever would listen, and shut the ark. That period of time was 120 years. I also paralleled that with the book of Acts, with this thought, and nothing to necessarily go into this evening. But in Acts chapter 2, I believe, that on the day, maybe it's chapter 4, but on the day of Shabbath or Pentecost at the feast, there were 120 people in the upper room. And what I was making a point of is that there were very limited people who followed Yah and followed the ways of Yah, whether they subscribed to the teachings of Noah, whether they subscribed to the teachings of Yeshua as Mashiach. All of the work people mocked and scorned, and very few people actually experienced salvation. This is why Yeshua would say things like, few there be that were saved. Because not many were going to take up the call to be delivered. People would normally ascribe to the thought, well, I have more time. I don't, that whole God thing, dealing with that Bible, I'm gonna finish sinning first. This is why the text says, "In the day you hear," what does it say you should do? The day you hear.
You asking me?
Yes, I mean anybody can answer, but yes,
He says to harden not your heart.
yeah, the day you hear. So don't give your, and this is the way flesh works. Well, I'll pick that Yah thing up tomorrow. No, see, tomorrow your heart is going to be more inclined to wickedness. And if you, and this is again what Yeshua said, a man said, Master, I'll follow you wherever you go. But first, let me bury my father. He said, let the dead bury the dead. In other words, he said, if you make an excuse today, you'll always make an excuse. If you're going to do right, start right today. You're going to stop eating something unclean, start it today. You're going to stop watching a certain TV show, start today. Don't wait. Because if you make an excuse today, you'll always make an excuse. No, in Acts chapter 1 it is, and I don't recall the verse right offhand, but Acts chapter 1, verse 15. It says, in those days, Kepha stood up in the midst of the taught ones or disciples and said the number of the names together were about 120. So I was just making a parallel. There were very few people who actually subscribed, and I thought it was interesting that it was 120 years that he gave man. And it was very few people who followed Noah, just like it was very few people that followed me. So I wasn't saying that there were 120 people.
Oh, okay. Understood.
Thanks.
Can I
Thanks
ask
for
another
asking the
question? Can I
Yes,
ask
ma'am.
another one quickly? So this is in relation to you're saying about, I know you said you weren't gonna go into it regarding what the Most High looks like. It's just that in Genesis, when it mentions Adam hearing the Most High walk in the garden, and he was asking Adam, "Where are you?" Wouldn't that suggest that he perhaps had a human form when
Yeah,
he
I
had
mean,
heard him walking, unless it's not literal,
yeah, I
in the
mean,
garden?
I think Genesis also says when Cain killed his brother, his blood cried out from the ground. Now, I'm not a scientist and I don't believe blood makes audible sounds, but I can't say it doesn't, right? So I think the point that I'm ultimately making is that the creator is expressed in those terms, but what that does for us is sometimes it causes us to believe like he's 6'4", 250 pounds, clean look on his face. Like he's not a man. So does he actually have legs? I don't really necessarily get into that with people. I just mention it for the sake of exaggerating a point. So he may have legs. I don't know what type of entity creates all of this and has legs, but I think he also can present himself in whatever form he wants to. I don't think he's restricted to his deity. Uh, Additionally, like when Solomon made a house, he said, uh, even the heavens can't contain me, and you're gonna make a house for me. So again, there's this language that's being used, and I don't want to blaspheme the Most High. So I don't know what that being is. I can't begin to understand it. I can only understand what it created and showed us in its manifestation. And in its manifestation, or in his manifestation, the same entity created a woman that can produce milk to nurse a child and turned around and created a pineapple and then turned around and created a giraffe, and then turned around and created a disc in the sky called the moon that hangs on nothing, and then turned around and created the ability in your ear to know that that is not a dog. That sound right there is not a fire hydrant. I can't explain that entity to you.
Yeah,
I can only tell you my interaction with it, him, I'm saying, and what I know of him, but I can't tell you whether he actually walk or not.
yeah. It's just the image part, image and likeness. Image would suggest you look like something made in his image and likeness is in character. That's why, that came to me, because obviously, like traditionally we're taught he doesn't, obviously spirit, we know that
Right.
you wouldn't look at him in human form, but then it might just be more simpler. It could be, that's all.
Yeah, here's a thought
Yeah.
though. But part of the image and likeness, and it's something to look into, so I won't go too deep into it today, but I mention it because the student of the Bible is going to look and explore this thought, right? Without
Mhm.
going too far off the deep end. Part of the image and likeness is man has divine intellect, man has the ability to create. Now, whatever caused the man to make a device that I don't know, where are you on the planet?
I'm in the UK. I mean, like, I understand likeness in terms of character, but image is literally what something looks like.
Yeah, I mean, that's something to explore. And it's something to explore. I'll kind of pause there on that thought.
Mhm.
It is a
Yeah.
deeper
I'm
thought.
in the UK. Yeah.
Yeah, and somebody created a device that I can talk to you in Washington, D.C. from, right? It's
Mhm.
just that ideal is just like it's kind of crazy. Their ability to create design and this, that, and the third. But there are other thoughts on that I can talk. Maury Kefa, and then I'll go to Maury Kaboyahu. And I definitely would love to hear from the other audience members, or else I will start to call on people. I have no shame with that, and there are no hiding them. So I will call on you. I can see everybody's name on the screen. I will kindly call on you and ask you to share some thoughts. Okay, Maury Kefa, yes, sir.
Shalom, Mr. Pakai. Just to briefly kind of respond to the Koti about the image. This is what I would say how I look at it. And how well, it's two ways I look at it, but I'll explain one way how I look at it. One that's more relative to what she's understanding and interpreting when it says image. When Yahuwah created us, I think that one way you can look at it when it says let us make man in our image is because as human beings we have a conscious and a subconscious, and those two things actually allow us to really create and really to have this divine intellect. But and I don't know if anybody, even my own experiences when I was born, I don't know if anybody else could share the same thing, but even when I was born, not when I was born, but growing up as an adolescent, I can recollect me feeling connected to this divine being. Every time I would hear the word God, I would somehow try to understand him. And when I did, what spoke to my conscience is that he's in me and I am like him. I had that since a kid, and then over time it somewhat was getting defiled through the world, right? But and through the carnal body. But I digress a little. But when Yahuwah created us, we have to understand he experiences the world through us. So when we're made in his image, we're made as if he walked the earth. That's why people still, I don't want to get another. That's I believe, even the when you go to the synoptic gospels, when you look at John and understanding Yahusha and how he's interpreted as the son of Elohim, and being, how he said, "I am the Father, you see me." I believe that Yahusha had this same understanding, interpretation, is knowing that the Father is in all of us, and since we are the only beings on the planet or creation on the planet that can create and have this divine consciousness, we know full and well through that experience. And through that logic that we are him on this earth experiencing things. This is why it says, taste Yahuwah, see he is good. If you know that scripture, and also says that Israel is the apple of my eye. Whether you interpret that as in Yahuwah is watching us, it also can be interpreted as Yahuwah sees things through our lenses as well. But that's another conversation. So I'll answer that or respond to Koti that. But what I wanted to address and to highlight in the text to kind of add to what Zakane had excellent way that he brought this out tonight is the Nakash, and how revelatory that the interpretation and the understanding of what that is in this hour, and also to really grasp what Maury brought out today. This is why you see the Nakash show up in Genesis chapter 3, and this idea that it will be an enmity with the seed, right? And immediately after that, in Genesis chapter 4, we have the Cain and Abel situation. So if you pay close attention in the text, it answers its own question, right? A lot of times it answers itself, proves itself. You just have to pay attention. But you also have to look at this text and find your relation to it. And so to understand this dynamic of man's inherent or in this inclination, this evil inclination, we look at the Nakash as that point of reference and understand that this Nakash, that a lot of the serpent, right? Nakash is the Hebrew word for serpent in Genesis chapter 3. um, this experience that Eve was having was an experience that, you know, I surmise is with herself and with the aspect of choice that all of us have been given. And that also shines light to our power and also shines light to our intellect. Because if you understand that you can have the knowledge to do good, but you also have an inclination to do evil or bad when it is pleasing to you, then you really understand the authority that Yahuwah has given us. So, and this is what you see in man today. You see this technology, right, that we accredit to a lot of it to the fallen, and I don't want to get into that, and I won't, right? But we don't never credit to the authority that Yahuwah has given us, because a lot of times we see our situations in our own lives as sometimes hopeless, or sometimes we feel like we can't really perceive the kingdom. We can't perceive this authority and all really salvation. But Yahuwah has given us this authority, and so we look at Genesis, we see that. But we have to get through the mnemonics of things, right? The mnemonics of terms like Nakash, serpent, fallen, sons of God. So we can really parse this thing out and really make it clear. So, because that's the only way you're going to really understand what Zakane is speaking on tonight. If you don't really believe, if you really believe that Yahuwah created all things and you really believe in this Genesis account, you have to really understand what it says about us, right? And I think that looking at this Nakash and understanding this divine experience, this enchanting that happens to us, then you'll really understand that the world that we live in today is truly a wicked world, and man has fallen, right? Man has fallen. Eve fell, right? Because she didn't know death. But ultimately it was for her good, and it's for our good, because now we know. So when we look at the world today, we should know now. We we gave up Christmas, we gave up Easter, we gave up these pagan holidays. What does that mean though? That means something. That means that we all have experience with this Nakash, and we all have seen Yahuwah's face, so to speak, right? We all knew that we were in darkness. So if we're in light, then now we have to manifest that through the wisdom that he's given us in these experiences. But I'm a yield.
I'll just say something about what you just shared, at least a portion of it. He talked about this Nakash, and I think there was some conversation about it last week. Notice this correlation here in Genesis chapter 6, right? And Yah, 6 and 5. And Yah saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth. And notice this, that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The imagination and thoughts of his heart were only evil continually. Now, notice in James chapter 1, right? And maybe it's James chapter 1 and verse 13. It says, let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of Elohim, for Elohim cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempt he any man. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Eve was curious about the information that she didn't have access to. She was enticed by it. And that enticement led her to go make a choice opposite of what she was told to do. And that is the same thing that's in the earth today. Like, I don't know what makes, some man decide to be interested in some other man in a perverse way. I don't know what causes your mind. That's the imagination of your mind happening. What would cause somebody to celebrate and do these other things that, you tell, hey man, that's not in the Bible. Well, it's still such and such birthday, like Santa Claus, like that's your imagination. Maury Kaboyahu. Yes, sir. And after that, I'm calling on individuals who don't have their hand raised, and it's going to be at random, but it's enough of y'all that I would love to hear what you think on what was shared today. And I will be calling on you. So just if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. Yes, sir. Kaboyahu.
Toda. Praise Abba Yahuwah for this teaching and this revelation. Man, this was told, family. I appreciate you laying it out this way, Zycane. Man, there's a lot to chew on. I'm gonna go back and watch this again because it was a lot here. And when you were teaching of it, it immediately brought me into, like you said, today's time. And even Mashak talked about this. Matthew, was it? I believe it's 23. He says it'll be like the times of Noah again. He was using that to suggest, well, nobody's gonna know the time, so it's gonna be like the current state where men is all about self. They're gonna be out marrying, doing all these things, ambition, so and so. And then the flood's gonna come when they're not suspecting it. This is why. Now, I didn't even know you were gonna teach this way. I don't think any of us did, but it kind of clarifies or goes into more in depth, kind of what we've been discussing leading up to this conversation about, and like you just said, every inclination of man's heart is evil. That's where the issue lies, right? What, like you asked, what will cause another man to have a desire for another man? This is why we were saying you can only be led astray by what's already in your heart. Nobody puts it in there. It's in you. When you agree with the Nahash, you go in that way then. This is why now when you have people trying to explain righteousness in today's world, it seems so foreign. You guys probably experienced this coming into the awakening and you coming under the obedience of Abba Yah's word, his Torah. People look at you like you have a problem, like you're strange, like you're doing something that's foreign. That's how far removed. This is why he says, in fact, to be friends with the world is to be enemy with Abba Yah, because of the system of the world and the way it is. It's perverse. It's like Babylon, Sodom and Gomorrah on a global scale, right? That's what we're in contention with. And what Zakane was explaining about the natural state of man prior to Eve being seduced and lured away by her own lust and Adam following through with her, was that everybody had freely what they needed. No concern, no worry, or anything. This is why Mashak, get this, Mashak says the kingdom does not come with observance. You're not going to point to a place, there is a kingdom. It is a state of being in men's hearts. That's the kingdom of Abba Yahuwah. And when you come teach, it's like Mashiach, our master, he came and taught this because the world, men of the world are in power. They killed him because that doctrine went against their best interests, which is lust, power, greed. This is the system of the world today. He alluded to the Gentiles' reign. All these people who took lands that didn't belong to them. All the people who took people who didn't belong to them. That's why we're here and all over, the Bantu people, Israelites, right? And we did the same thing, which is why we got removed from the land of Israel. You remember Isaiah chapter 1? He said the whole head is sick because we would neglect the widows. And we had orphans, family, in the nation of Israel, which means nobody claimed a kid. People gave up kids. And we still do this in the black community. We sell kids for drugs and all this stuff. Israelites are still the same because they're under another ruach. They listen to the Nahash like Cain. So because every man is out for self, like ambition, you are a detriment to your neighbor. So the Torah came simply to teach us the way of Abba Yahuwah. Love one another. Love your Father in heaven. Mashiach taught the Torah. So they said, let's kill him. We don't want to deal with that. But again, amazing teaching, sir. Praise Ab Yahuwah. This was told. All praise to the Most High.
15%, man. That's 15%. Yeah, hallelujah, though. I see recognized hand, but I'm gonna jump on a ledge and call on some people I don't see because I do want to hear from some other voices. So I'm starting with Zakaria Zamar. If you don't mind, Akoti, open up, share your thoughts, please.
Shalom, everybody. I literally knew you were going to call me. Like,
You know that. You know that. 'Cause I was actually getting ready to call Koti Kimmy and Brandon. I think they were on the line, but
maybe I drew it towards myself.
oh,
Um,
maybe.
all praises. I thought it was a very wonderful lesson. As we were in the groups, we kind of discussed some of the questions that we had and what we wanted to learn. And I think a lot of our questions were hit in this. Just the understanding of, to a deeper level of the distinction between Cain and Abel was really what hit home for me. And the characteristics that were attributed to Cain, not just being like, okay, yeah, his offering, wasn't sufficient to Abba Yah, but why it wasn't and what was in his heart, and the things that even led after that, how he was exiled and then he doubled down on his exile, and the way that you brought out also the hiding, the carnal aspect of hiding when we commit transgression. And I posted this earlier in the chat a little while back when you were going over this, but it brought to light the scripture that says that we are to confess our sins to one another that we may be healed, because that confession not only brings about the light to that darkness, but it holds us accountable. It does so many things, and it helps us dissipate that natural carnal desire to want to hide, and then that inclination to continue in the darkness, because as you mentioned, we will continue in that darkness, especially if one hasn't been caught, if that thing hasn't been brought to light. We're going to be more inclined to continue on in that darkness, and it's going to come greater and greater, and before we know it, we are fully, our consciousness is fully seared. So I think that that was a great, great, great point that you made, and it really brought a whole lot of light to the other scriptures that you also brought out to back it, to make sure that we are confessing our sins, we are bringing these dark attributes of ourselves unto light, so that they can be just completely eradicated from one another through accountability, not only accountability for ourselves, but accountability within the community, to have a community that you can trust in, which again brings me back to Acts, what you were saying too. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling and going from place to place, but
Oh,
I
go
thought it
ahead.
was so good, and like everything connects, because even as you were speaking about Acts and how everybody was supposed to come together and pool money in so that nobody was wanting and nobody was, nobody was hurting and everybody had everything, that comes with an aspect of trust. We were able to trust one another with our transgressions and not worry that, we were going to be talked about, or rumors were going to be spread, or we were going to be judged harshly or judged wrongly for the things that we were dealing with. But to know that we had a communal base that was going to not only be there for us, but help us overcome those things that we were bringing to light. So I thought it was awesome how everything just tied in so eloquently. So Toda Rabah.
Hallelujah. I like the point that you were making as far as confessing sin, because the carnal mind hides their iniquity. The right mind confesses it and forsakes it. So, hey, I would, you confess your faults one before another. Go tell on yourself. Because once you go tell on yourself, you got people watching like, oh no, when won't you doing that again? But people don't normally, the carnal mind doesn't espouse that thought. I don't know, and I'm coming back to a couple of raised hands in a moment, but I don't know, Nessa Zamaria, I don't know if that is my brother Brandon or my sister Kimmy, but if you would like to share anything, please do. CJ, I'm coming to you next. These are just some random people on the screen, and I'll go back to the hands that's formally raised, but don't hide, y'all. Come on out. Okay, Kimmy. Brandon, Nessa Zamaria.
Shalom.
Oh, hallelujah. Look at that. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was dealing with my son. Wow. Go in another room, please. Thank you for my pencil. Did you ask me a question?
Just wanted to get your thoughts, any observations or things you wanted to share.
I enjoyed the breakdown. I know I'm piggybacking, but I really did enjoy the breakdown of
No pigs.
just that.
No pigs.
Huh?
No pigs. We got a veggie
Oh,
bag.
sorry. Well, I'm expounding.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Better. Okay. No, I enjoyed the breakdown of what typically happens when we operate in sin, and how that's not a new thing, that it's been happening ever since Adam and Eve, hiding when we operate in sin. um I appreciate that breakdown. There were some other things I'm trying to jog because I'm just coming off of doing some disciplining. So when you called me, I was right in the midst of it. um yeah, I that breakdown, and there were some other things. Please forgive me.
No, you good. We can come back to you. I mean, if I was being chastised and my phone rang when I was a kid, I'm like, yes, like, God was hearing me. I'm like, good. My mom about to go answer the phone now.
Like,
So
that's where I was. I'm about to bust your head to the white.
yeah.
Come back to me. I'll have some
Okay, we'll
insight.
come back to you. Akoti Fije, and then I'll go back to the hands that's formally raised. So just thank y'all for bearing with me. BJ, you're being called upon. She might be taking a nap. She might be a long way from her phone. She might be driving. Who knows? Okay, so we had a couple hands raised. Danielle, yes, sir.
No, Mr. Kai. Moray, I'm getting to the point where I feel like going over the English text, it's just like doing gymnastics. I'm getting to the point that I feel like if I don't learn the Hebrew, if I don't learn it, I forever be glossing over the text. Even if I study it down to the wire, learning it and studying it in English, I will not get what I need from this text. And I just want to know your opinion on it. I need to learn it from the Hebrew standpoint and also study the ancient culture as I've been doing, but not as rigorous as I should. But um, right now, even just breaking down every scripture and going back and finding the witnesses to it and different translations and the different meanings of words in the English, it just does not do it. And I'm seeing just how you just taught this. I wouldn't have gotten this from my method of study. So how important is the Ibri? And again, it just seems like it's going to be forever. We'll be doing mental gymnastics with the scriptures until we learn it in the original text. And I yield.
So here are my thought on that. I'm glad you shared that. There is a thought and a set of teachings that you cannot understand unless you understand Ivrit, and a portion of that has validity. Yah isn't restricted to any particular language when he expresses his ruach, right? So you can learn the things I teach. I'm telling you, I got it in English. I got it in English. And when you understand the spirit or the ruach that is the through line through the text, you can read it in plain English and be like, oh, that's what that's saying. But there's a difference between reading and studying. So when we talked about that word violence, right? You read it in English, you just think, oh, like they were like killing each other or punching each other in the face. Well, you also have to understand that the text uses a lot of languages similar to how we use in English. So we use the word branch in English to represent a tree all the time. Branches of science, branches of the military, branches of mathematics, family trees. We use that language all the time. If you watch sports and today's vernacular, you would say things like, "Oh man, LeBron James is a beast," or whatever football player, he's a monster. Is he really a monster, or are you saying he's really great at what he does? And he's superhuman at what he does. So I think sometimes we escape the ideal that we use the same language today, but we don't think the Bible has the authority to use it because we have been taught and trained to go to church, hoop and holler, spread our hands and pray and sing all these elaborate songs that talk about stuff that's a bunch of mysticism, like going off into some heaven and going into the sky when the government of Yah is going to be on earth. And we never really actually read much of the Bible. Like, if we're just honest with ourselves, some of us read much of it and had no clue what it was talking about. But if we're honest with ourselves, once you start to study the Bible, so when I said earlier the word metonym, right? I was talking about how violence is a metonym for the word or the ideal of unjust gain, right? It's almost like if you talk about a judge, um, uh, you talk about him in terms of the bench. Oh, the bench. Well, a bench is equated, it's a word that represents a wider set of ideas, which is the bench is the judge. Or people say, bring home the bacon. You're not bringing home bacon, it represents earning. That word violence is used the same way. Cain's blood cried out from the ground. I'm going to ask anybody on the phone, have you ever heard blood make an audible sound? Most of us are going to say no. The Bible uses that language. There was a serpent in the garden. And these liars have taught you to believe in English, because that's the way that they neophyte minds have expressed it to you, that a serpent used to walk on legs and now he slither on the ground. I'm telling you, that's nothing but the furthest thing from the truth. The serpent, I don't think I never talked to no snake. Now, if one of y'all tell me y'all talked to a snake and they talk to you back, then please let me know. I don't think snakes have conversations with humans. And then smart people say, well, donkeys do. See right here. Well, when you read in the Brit Hadashah, it'll tell you it was a female donkey, but there was a male angel that spoke on the donkey's behalf. So we just have to read and study. So yes, reading Hebrew is definitely going to help enlighten you, but you don't have to fluently learn Hebrew to understand the Bible. I understand and speak Hebrew, but I also, and not fluent per se, but I understand and I also understand the through line through the scripture. And I was taught by teachers in English. We used a lot of Hebrew too, but you can get it that way also.
Yeah, Moray, and that's how I study it. And I'm seeing these things, and Yah is blessing me with the wisdom to see these things. He is. I know this because I didn't have the same wisdom 10, 15, 5 years ago, even some of it even last year. I think what I'm expressing is just my frustration to get through the text, and I'm just going to have to humble myself, slow down, and bunker down and take my time and do the study. That's all. And Todah for that.
Yeah, I'll tell you this, the key word that you said was slow down, right? I think I come across sometimes people who think that you're going to get off a soundbite of a teaching, which took me 18 years to get, people going to get it in like 6 weekends. It don't work like that. Like when it says study is much weariness to the flesh, I mean, I could speak for days just how much time with men who deeply study texts that I had to spend to get a modicum of understanding on a matter. And I was saying in the meeting before with some mores and some brothers, I studied something 10 years before I even made a statement on it publicly. Like 10 whole years before I even taught on it publicly. I'm saying that level of detail should go into, but some people, we just in a rush, like you're gonna microwave the truth, and it doesn't work like that. You're gonna make a fool of yourself, you're gonna make a fool of the scripture. So it does take time. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Maury Ducey, yes, sir.
Hey, shalom, family. I just wanted to speak to the question that was asked earlier. I have a little bit of insight, and I just wanted to speak about the linguistics of that word image. So it is the Hebrew word zelem, and it's the zare, the lamed with the mem feet. It's Strong's H 6754. And in this particular context, that word is closer akin to shadow. So as the Moray spoke about earlier, it had more to do with abilities. So look at it like this. So a person's shadow can do nothing independent of them, right? Not only that, but the shadow is such a minute or a small part of the actual whole of the actual person that without the whole, the shadow is useless. So it's more of a shadow of him. And like I said, the shadow is able to imitate or to do what the original is doing. But that's the actual word there. And when you look in the text, when you look in the interlinear, his own, those two words, his own, were not in the original text. So by them adding that and then presenting it a certain way, it steered our minds to think more of, oh, what does he look like? Or what does when in Hebraic thinking, we are not as much concerned of what the substance of something is. When we look up at the sun, we say that is a big ball that the Most High put up there and suspended and it's for our heat, and that's where it ends. We don't, as Hebrews, look and say, oh, is it hydrogen or is it gas? Is it helium? So this text was put together in a way where it kind of steers your mind. It's more a shadow than anything when that word image, what it was translated from. And with that, I'll yield.
Thank you for sharing. I know we still have a few hands raised. I know there were Facebook Live or YouTube. Were there any questions from those domains or formats at all? Let me know. Let me know.
No, there was none on Facebook.
Okay. Jordan, yes, sir. And then we'll go to Coty Royalty again.
Shut up, Maury. I just wanted to briefly mention, it was like, I think Danielle had mentioned about the language and just with studying, but with the teaching you did tonight, with the words on giants, I believe it was like chapter 6, verse 4, and talks about giants. I know we weren't getting into all that, but remember you did a study on that a while back, or teaching on that. And those giants were basically like what we call like tech giants of today, like an Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or something like that. And it goes hand in hand with violence and how they are acquiring a bunch of resources at the cost and expense of another people. And so I was just seeing how it takes time, but just like how you presented and you laid out the content tonight in relation to a previous class that I took under you, and it's starting to make sense how there's more in the text than what we see at face value. And so I just really appreciate the study tonight. Ta-ra.
Yeah, I'll say that's a good point. I mean, people celebrate people like Steve Jobs, right? And people would, for example, have these arguments with each other about an iPhone or Android, right? But to be honest, you can't get an iPhone or Android phone for that matter unless you steal nickel and cobalt out of South Africa in the Congo. And in order to get that, if you've watched any YouTube videos, you have to commit treachery. So while the tech giant here is celebrated as a deity almost, like, oh, Steve Jobs, he's great, and people aspire to be him. He fills the earth with violence through his platform. And the reality is that you do not need a new iPhone every year to be published or produced. You just don't need that. Like people survive without telephones for years. I mean, I had my first cell phone in the 11th grade, and I was one of 3 people in the school that had one. Now it's so promiscuously spread abroad, everybody has one. Like 9-year-olds have cell phones. But in order to get that device in your hand, people have to die. And the more you want the devices, the more people are being harmed. And that is the pervasive thing that I'm trying to express, that the Torah is expressing, that we don't connect. We don't look at this device and somebody in another country being caused harm. Another quick example is that one Cesar Chavez, who fought against the oppression of migrant workers in the grape fields. Well, in order to get fruit on your table, they bring migrant workers from other countries. So the blueberries that you eat, I mean, yeah, if you're not growing them yourself, it's just, I mean, they're not coming to you by people being hugged and the Care Bear stare. This is violence happening to get that, right? And the nations that come to do that work, if they speak up for themselves, is more violence executed on them. And that is one of the pervasive thoughts that was trying to be expressed. Okoti Royalty, yes, ma'am.
Oh, Shalom, thanks. Yeah. Thanks for calling on me again. Yeah, I don't wish to debate obviously because that's what we don't do. But yeah, it was interesting to hear what one of the Archie mentioned earlier regarding the question I had of image, because traditionally we've always been taught that image is nothing to do with any physical representation of the Most High. That's what we've always known. This is just a new question that I have as a truth seeker, because sometimes things might not be as we understand it, when we just really really like studying something. Because he mentioned the word selem, which I found as well, as the Hebrew word, which I did actually put in the chat probably just before he spoke. And although the root word I believe is shadow, sorry, just looking at it now, it was often used, or root meaning to shade, I should say, which you could look into, but it was often used to talk about a physical representation or even graven images and idols, not just in the Genesis, but throughout the Bible, which would suggest that it is something to do with how something physically looks. That's what I wanted to say. And so we've both looked at the same thing and have come up with different ideas. So I thought that was quite interesting. That's all I wanted to say. Yeah. Are you still there? Am I still
Yeah.
here?
No,
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I'm using my phone. It was a bit quiet just now. So yeah, that's all really. I just think it's just thought provoking, regarding that word, image, and really what it means, where it's come from. And we could have different viewpoints on it, but Strong says what it says in regards to the Hebrew word. That's it. I yield.
Yeah, I would say I definitely encourage people to explore it deeper. This is necessarily not the format to go into it, because I think, I'm going to say a soundbite of the information. And here in Revelations 13, for example, in verse 15, it describes this first beast. And this is a longer longitudinal study. In Revelations 13 and 15, it says, and he had power to give life into the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many that would not worship the image of the beast that should be killed. Now, when we read this, in one sense, like it's people read this all type of ways. And again, this is a longer thought that I can't necessarily go into at the moment. But this image of a beast, of the beast, is not like a clay statue. It's not a replica. It's not a statue or whatever have you. What it's more expressing in this text, which again, we had to read Revelations 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 and break them down. It takes a longer time to do that so people can understand it. Otherwise, I'm just uttering words. Is that there was a nation that is being referred to here and a government that was being referred to, just like it was in Daniel, that was the image of this beast. And another government was formed to mimic this government. And anybody that did not bow down to this government or worship this government or the practices of this government, that they should be killed. And what that image did was stretch far beyond the ideal of just like a carbon copy in terms of a replica. But again, it's a deeper kind of longitudinal study. I think part of just mentioning it today is for the student to examine the thought. And I said this in a group before, and I just say it to people. Generally speaking, this is general because you have people who are off their rocker. If somebody who has spent time studying gives you a clue and say, oh, no, that's probably not saying that, I'm saying you should exhaust yourself and look into it. Now, you may not draw the same conclusion, but it's worth its merit that somebody said, I wouldn't look at that like that. It is worth its merit for you to examine what is being said. If they tap you on the shoulder and say, just take your time. Like if a teacher during a test told you, before you hand your test in, double check your work and definitely look at question number 6 again. Now, she can't give you the answer, but if she's tipping you off, go back and look at it again. And again, some of these conclusions that I draw, and I said it may have took me 16 years to come to the conclusion that I came to. So I don't take those things lightly, and it's been, a considerable amount of time that I've investigated some of these thoughts, and I still give the account that there's a possibility I could be wrong. Great Awakening, I think that's Maury James. Yes, sir.
Shalom, sir, and shalom to everybody. Just wanted to share a little bit more about what the Okoti was talking about, and Maury Ducey definitely touched on it in relation to the image portion. And like she said, she already looked it up in regards to what image. I think if we look at, I guess first and foremost, every image needs light as well. So the further we move out of his image, the further we move into darkness, or our own heart's desire. But Exodus 31 and 2, I think, give us a little bit more insight when it talks about Batzalel or Bezalel, as some people would say. It literally means in the image of El, or in the image of Elohim. Now, in one fashion, it does say in his protection, but I believe it's more so, it gives us more insight with verse 3 that Yah himself say, I have filled him with the Ruach of Elohim. And then he goes on to say some attributes of that being, of course, wisdom, understanding, knowledge, and all manner of workmanship, to devise cunning works and to work gold, silver, and brass. But think about when the Most High made the firmament. Who else can teach someone unless they have done it themselves? So I just sharing. And by the way, thank you so much for breaking this down. I think everything is going to lead to whether we looking to walk in the Most High's image and His ways, and truly seeking the kingdom, or we go walk in our own heart's desire and in our own greed. But Toda Rabbah, I just wanted to share that with the Okoti.
Yeah, hallelujah. And thanks for chiming in. Hope it was beneficial. Amma and Matt, yes, ma'am.
Shalom. How are you?
So, all is well on my end.
Good to hear that. I wasn't going to say anything, but since I'm medical, I've heard there's so many questions about the blood crying out, and from my perspective, from what I have learned and studied throughout my life, I'm with you on this. I believe that that was more like a metaphor. Like he said, the bloodshed often brings like a vibration or crying out that reaches to the Shamaim that the Father can hear. So I felt that's what that was like in Genesis 4. So I really believe that when we talked about it's crying out, I really like it's what you said about Cain and how he kept the sin he kept doing. It was like reverberating the vengeance and justice through our creation. I think that's more like a metaphor. But when it comes to the blood making sound, it vibrates. Remember, inside of our body, we have gas, we have nitrogen and oxygen, and they move along with the blood. And there are sounds in there. It's vibrations. The blood, you hear it with your blood pressure. We press it so hard that you'll hear it, but you only hear naturally the blood going through the heart and the chambers of the heart. So you remember, we have a whole little circulatory system in the body. And like I said, like our neurons firing, things like that, they crackle just like lightning. You hear them on a certain kind of level. But anyway, I just thought it was very interesting what you were saying about the blood. I've always thought that was just more of a metaphor to kind of so it can resonate with us as believers. And I yield.
Hallelujah. Yeah, I would agree that it makes a sound, probably in the sense that while it's alive, but once blood hits the air and it's on the ground, I'm like, yeah, I just think it was something that's being expressed there. And what the language seems to have been expressing is that his blood was shed inappropriately, and there was no just cause for it to happen. An injustice was done, and that crying out from the ground is like that expression. I think we read the same thing in Isaiah 59. It's like, and almost every time you read this ideal in the text where he went down to Sodom and Gomorrah to see this great cry that was happening. But when you went down there, it didn't seem like nobody was crying. It was just more like it was some wickedness going on, and everybody wasn't in cahoots with what was happening. Some people detest what was happening. And yeah, I think that's the point that it's expressing. So yes, thank you for sharing that. Maury Kepler, yes, sir. Well, either your mic is muted or your hand went down, one of the two. Well, I'm in hopes that Lisa, can we hear from you or coaching? I know you just put your face mask on, like I'm getting ready to go to bed. I gotta get up tomorrow. Actually, I don't know that. I'm actually teasing, but Coach Lisa, can we hear from you? Misha, somebody? Anybody? I know if I had your numbers, I'll call y'all and put y'all on speakerphone.
I'm Aisha, and I think
Okay, Maisha.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't anyone else. I thought that the message was very thought-provoking. It really brought home that I need to read, and read. And like you said, there is a difference between reading and studying. It was interesting to hear the idea of the ill-gotten gain and a different definition of violence than you typically would think of, right? You think of, I hear violence and I think of, killing, stabbing, robbing, but it goes much deeper than that. And it's sad, but it shows like why we as a people are in the state that we're in, because we have strayed so far away, but that happened in the very beginning. So it was very thought-provoking, and it is imperative from my end that I need to go back and I need to study. And like you said earlier, I have to really acclimate and immerse myself in a culture because it is foreign. It's not anything that, you know, I've grown up in. So I appreciate it. I will be watching it again too, taking more copious notes, but I appreciate you and thank you.
Thank you. And where are you on the earth?
I am in California, Carson, California, suburb of
Safe
Los
out
Angeles.
there?
Yes, I'm safe. I'm
Okay.
not by the fires. We're about 20, 30 minutes away.
Yeah, one of my buddies had he sent a picture that his house was safe, but he had a tree fall in the garage in the middle of his living room, and he said, "Well, you know, considering what's happening, he'll take the tree fall and then do
Yeah,
some considerable damage." But I'm you know, thankful that those who are safe and
absolutely. Sadly, I did have a relative that lost their house in Altadena, like nothing left, burned to the ground. It's been a very sobering experience, but praise Yah, they made it out and they were unscathed. Everything else can be replaced.
yes. I do know people who did not make it out of fires, and that is not encouraging. So if you can make it out and you lose some possessions, then better a living dog, I think the text says, is better than a dead lion. So
Yes.
yes, sir.
But thank
Oh, thank you. Definitely thank you for chiming in and sharing. And thank you for responding. I was just calling people at random. So Kabo Yahoo, yes, sir.
So based on as I came, what you shared in the the heart of the message, and I know we heard Dr. Howard speak on this, and the state of the Bantu people, Israel today. And I want everybody to be honest about this, just like an inflection period. Do we think that Israel is ready to live that type of life? Because that is how it will be in the kingdom, in regards to not wanting for self, not coveting, not doing things to benefit self solely in that regard, giving up things for the sake of others, caring for one another, living. This is what when Mashak said, be a living sacrifice. Your life is now dedicated to sacrificial work, servitude, honoring, working for others, expecting no gain, not doing it because you want something, but doing it out of genuine care and love for one another. That's the kingdom. When we talk about dwelling as a community, it only works if that is at the center of it, if we have that type of heart posture. Zakane, from your perspective, do you think that's possible prior to Mashiach coming down? Do you think Israel will be able to attain that?
Oh, when I think about the ideal of attaining, I'd say this answer in two ways, maybe three. I didn't go to the text, but in Matthew chapter 5, it makes this statement, and hopefully I'll read it. So it says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see Elohim." Now, I'm not going to tell you who's going to see him and not see him literally. So again, some parts I can't get into with people. But I do know that the pure in heart will be able to manifest the idea, and I don't think it takes some great thing to do it. I mean, you have some who will the whole magnitude of all the people on the face of the earth be ready? No, I don't even think that. Yeshua walked the earth and did his work, and at the end of his course of life, it was 70 people. After, whatever happened in Shavuot, it was 120 people. Then they did the work and it was 3,000 and 5,000, and it grew and exploded. Think about it in this context, right? In one sense, right? A 30-year-old and some of his friends, right, because they told Mashiach, you're not even 50 years old. So I don't know, what are you, 40, 30, whatever it is. Some kids did some work that we learned about, and that's why we on the phone today, or this device. The second way I'd answer that, so the pure in heart, they'll get to work. I don't like, do I need to wait on the whole entire body to come together? I'm not even convinced of that. So I don't need to wait on that, what everybody else is going to do. Some people, when it comes down to it, they love their life. And he said, those that love their life shall lose it. They love their possessions. Well, I'm not getting rid of my house. Keep your house and let it perish with you. That's as far as I'm concerned. So for those who are pure in heart, they're gonna move on. Like this, the quote you just put in there, the meek shall inherit the earth. And I think that's one way to answer. The second way is when you read the prophet Isaiah or Yeshayahu, he talks about this framing that Yeshua spoke about. The kingdom is a mustard seed. And what people want to see is the later manifestation of the kingdom, inhabit the whole earth. Yeshua do all the work on their behalf, and they just walk in from glory to glory and all of the benefits, right? Like, oh, see, we're going to be over here praising and worshiping at the feet. It's a mustard seed, meaning it starts small and insignificant. The prophet Solomon said, despise not small beginnings. It doesn't take 90 or 2,000 people to get started. It only takes a few. So a few people with a sincere heart to get together, more sincere people come, and wicked people with trouble gonna come. But the kingdom is like a mustard seed. In Isaiah chapter 2, it says that mountain, that small government, that's what the word mountain means. But that small government is going to break the feet of those kings, and it's going to be a great stone or a mountain that fills the whole earth. And again, that takes time, but the few who are ready has to get started. So I'm not the one that's convinced that people aren't ready. I think people are pleading and ready for this, and those who are ready should start the work. Those who not, y'all just be the ones on the boat waiting for Noah to like, oh yeah, no, it ain't. No, I mean, listen, man, you crazy old man. Them mountains aren't gonna be covered. You see that big old mountain up there? You sound like a lunatic. And when it rained on day 1 and day 30, it rained 4 days in a row. They ran to Noah and hung out for a few days. And then after a few days, they're like, oh man, this dude crazy. Let's go over and get back to what we was doing. And they continued their wickedness. So I don't think everybody is going to come to the work. I do think the small few has to get the work started. And those who sincere, and I tell people, I prefer East Coast. I prefer living, in a warm climate. I prefer all of that. But when I come across sincere people who trying to get busy, like in sincerity, like, what do you think I care about selling everything I got? What do I got to lose? Because what benefit do it take to gain the whole world and lose my soul? And, for whatever it's worth, I mean, I may have a thing or two that the carnal mind will hold on to, but for those who want to get busy and do the work, let's get to it. That's my take on that.
Told hey, that was told. Hey, I'm gonna cut that, edit it, upload on my YouTube page as a short. Inspire the world.
Then my actions got to match my words. So just know, I'm for the right people. I'm saying, like, I don't have moving wisdom, etc. But I don't have anything to lose. I mean, this is it for me. This is it. And to magnify the work and actually do the activity, there is no more higher calling than that. So,
But Moray, I can't do that because I got my kid in college. I just bought a house. I just started a new job. I got all this going on. So how can I do that?
oh, this is the beauty, right? This is the beautiful thing. I'm glad you asked that question because this is a very, very beautiful question. Uh, maybe this is Luke chapter 22. This is a beautiful question. And, whatever it's worth, I'm one of those guys who like to tell it like it is. What am I saying? Luke chapter 18, maybe? Where we gonna go? Luke chapter 18.
Could get the 10 virgins.
No, not that one. Let me see. Oh, it hides from me whenever I decide to look for it sometimes, but let me see. I mean, in one sense, it's the rich young ruler, but another sense, it's the parable of the pounds. Another sense, it's the. Oh, let's go to this beautiful. Let's go to Matthew 22, right? I may find it in Luke. I want it in Luke, but I have to find it, and it's hiding from me. I may have to go back to Luke in a second, but oh. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you'll see this in Luke, but notice this, right? Interesting to me. Matthew 22, sorry, in verse 1. It says, And Yeshua answered and spake a parable again by parables, and said, The kingdom of heaven is like unto a certain king which made a marriage for his son. And he sent forth his servants to call them that were bidden to the wedding, and they would not come. Again he sent forth other servants, saying, Tell them which were bidden, Behold, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fatlings are killed, and all the things are ready. Come unto the marriage. This is the point. But what did they do in verse 5? But they made light of it and went their ways, one to his farm, another to his merchandise. And the remnant took his servant and entreated them spitefully and slew him. Now, when you read this same text, which I actually prefer to read in Luke, do you know what the parallel for that in Luke is? Can you hear me? You're on mute if you do.
So I'm sorry, you thought me, Zaking?
Okay.
Yeah, let's try Luke 14. Sorry.
Talk about the banquet?
Yeah, let's try Luke 14.
Yeah, that's Luke 14. 13.
Actually prefer Luke. The physician teams to break it down a certain way. It's so beautiful. It is very, very beautiful. Okay, Luke 14, and he says, And he put forth a parable to them, or to those that were bidden, when he marked how they chose out the chief rooms, and saying to them, When I are bidden to a feast. All right, that's not it. Oh, yeah. I'm skipping down to Luke 14:16. Then said he unto him, A certain man made a great supper. A great supper. This is the kingdom of Yah. And sent his servant at supper time to say to them that were bidden, Come, for all things are now ready. And they all with one consent began to make excuse. The first said unto him, I have bought, a piece of ground, and I must needs to go see it. I pray thee, have me excused. And another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to prove them. I pray thee, have me excused. And another said, I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. So the servant came to and showed his master these things. Then the master of the house, being angry, said unto his servant, Go out quickly into the streets and the lanes of the city, and bring in hither the poor and the maimed, and the halt and the blind. And the servant said, Master, it is done, and thou hast commanded, yet there's still more room. You know what's interesting about this, when I read this? I'm kind of waiting for you to say, no, I don't know, because you probably don't know what's interesting to me. But you know what's interesting to me, though? Two things. One is that everyone here were people of means versus the people who actually came, because the other text will tell you, not many poor, not many rich men are called, not many mighty, but he has chosen the poor of this world, rich in faith. So the lame and the blind and the people who are destitute are more likely to gravitate toward this message. That's interesting to me. You know what else is interesting to me? Is when you read in verse 18, and they all with one consent began to make an excuse. And the first said unto him, I have bought a piece of ground. I must needs go and see. I pray thee have me excuse. When you read in the Torah, this is interesting. And I'm paraphrasing because we'd have to read it line for line to validate what I'm saying. When you read in the Torah, if you just bought a piece of land and you went to go to war, it said that you should go home because you just bought land, meaning you had a lawful reason not to be included in the cause of the campaign to expand the kingdom. It's also interesting, and another said, I bought 5 yoke of oxen. I need to prove them. I pray you have me excused. It's almost like another Torah-based excuse to why you shouldn't participate. Another Torah-based excuse was, another said, I have married a wife and therefore I cannot come. You know, when you first get married, and maybe you know the law, More, what happens when a man get married the first year?
Wife.
Say that again.
He gets to stay with his wife.
Yeah, you remember why?
No.
Here it is in Deuteronomy chapter 24. And I'm saying it's another Torah-based excuse why you cannot participate in the expansion of the kingdom. Like all these excuses was according to the Torah and by people who had means. This is Deuteronomy chapter 24. Maybe. It says, when a man have taken a new wife, he shall not go out to war, neither shall he be charged with any business. That word business means, that's the Hebrew word dabar, right? He shall not be charged with any dabar or any
Did we lose our king?
I believe we
Timothy,
did.
might been low all night. I don't know what happened. I think we lose them. Hold on.